My name is Brian Willson. I'm a U.S. citizen who's been interested in Korean issues for about 20 years. Um, my interest in Korea was consistent with my emerging interest in U.S. foreign policy all over the world, which grew out of my Vietnam experience in 1969 when I was in the United States Air Force. I started wondering about other wars, and I was initially very interested in the war that had occurred the decade prior to the Vietnam War, meaning the Korean War, what we call the Korean War. And I read, the first book I read was I.F. Stone's The Hidden History of the Korean War. And that was a shocking introduction for me to realizing that Vietnam had repeated Korea in many respects in terms of the false pretexts in which we got involved in the war, the amount of lying that went on to justify launching U.S. Intervention into Korea, and how we maintained the war over its 37-month duration. And so I want to run through just a little bit of the history that got me really more involved in Korea, because I realized that what the United States had, its role in Korea had amounted to a major crime in the 20th century that remains to this day unaddressed, and yet the implications for the Korean people remains intense, and consequently, because of U.S. belligerence, it remains an issue for the whole world. The United States has had an interest in Asia very explicitly going back to the Tyler administration in the 1840s, when we wanted to begin establishing trade with Asia. So beginning with Caleb Cushing, who was a commissioner to China in early 1840s, and then Admiral Dewey's naval expedition to Japan in the 1850s. We were attempting to establish trade relations with the sleeping giant of Asia that had lots of resources and, of course, lots of people. And Korea was part of this, became part of this interest in 1866. We attempted an expedition into Korea, which is called the General Sherman Incident, which was the ship got burned and the people on the ship were killed when they were refused entrance to up the river on the west side of Korea. And we didn't forget that, and so in 1871 we actually invaded Korea for the first time with maybe as many as 1,000 Marines and sailors in 21 or 25 ships, and destroyed a number of Korean ports and killed I don't know how many. The estimates range from 300 to 800 Koreans. Then in but then we left after that battle. We knew we weren't welcome, so we left. Our ships left, and yet there was this interest in establishing a trade relationship with Korea. So in 1882, we kind of forced the Korean oligarchic structure to sign a trade agreement with the United States. And that said that we would not militarily intervene in the life of Korea as long as Korea traded with us, essentially. So this is just backdrop to show the interest of the United States in Asia in general, and eventually in Korea. Well, then there was the Sino-Japanese War in 1894, 5. That was over Korea. And that launched Japan as an imperial power because they defeated the Chinese. And Manchuria was always part of the deal. Manchuria was considered a resource-rich part of China. And then 10 years later was the Russo-Japanese War, and the Japanese significantly defeated the Russians. So they, again, not just had emerged, but became the superior imperial power in Asia. And that war was ended when President Theodore Roosevelt secretly negotiated an end to the war. It's called the Taft-Katzer Agreement, in which he basically agreed that Japan could have Korea if we could stay unmolested in the Philippines, where we had been since 1899, 1898, during what we call the Spanish-American War. So we wanted to have our permanent presence in Asia, and that became, at that point, the Philippines. We needed coaling stations for our newly enlarged naval force that was going to be the way we facilitated the United States American expansion of markets. We domestically were no longer capable of consuming the products of our agriculture and our industrial production. So we really needed foreign markets more desperately than we had we were needing them in the late 1800s, but by the time the 20th century came around, we really needed them. So we needed coaling stations to fuel our ships. And we had a new one in Cuba and Guantanamo, and we had one in the Philippines. We had several in the Philippines. So we wanted to make sure that Japan was not considering our presence in the Philippines as violative of their Asian space. And they said that would be no problem as long as they could have Korea, which was how the Russo-Japanese War was ended, with the secret Taft-Katzer Agreement. Taft was the Secretary of State for President Roosevelt. So that established the Japanese as being the dominating power in Korea. And in 1910, the Japanese formally annexed Korea, and the United States supported that. And there were severe protests and riots for many years by the Koreans against this Japanese occupation. A very serious one in 1919, the year of the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I. It basically started the dynamic forces that led to World War II, unfortunately. But the Koreans came to Willson, who had made his famous speech about supporting the liberation of colonized people, and said, we're colonized, and they were completely rejected and denied a legitimate hearing. And so again, the United States was in essence supporting the Japanese occupation of Korea. And of course, all Koreans that have been allowed to read their own history, especially in the last 10 years, know all this.